to a reporter's question about the Russia investigation.
Don't remember much about it. All I can tell you is this. There was no collusion. There was no nothing. It's a disgrace, frankly, that they continue. You ought to look at Hillary Clinton, and you ought to look at the new book that was just put out by Donna Brazil.
So there it is, trademark deflection. But further over on the spectrum toward lie, there are flat-out falsehoods, like this claim that the passage of large-scale tax cuts will be the biggest in the history of our country. Now, the Washington Post gave 4 Pinocchios to that claim, and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan policy group, says the GOP plan would actually be the 8th largest tax cut since 1918. Now, we're almost all the way over on this scale, on this spectrum, almost all the way over to lie. That's in some ways the most controversial piece of this. People debate, when is he lying, when is he not? Well, here's an example. This is from the New York Times, just in this morning's paper. Apparently, the president's now casting doubt on the veracity of this Access Hollywood tape, which he previously admitted was real. Quoting the reporting here, he suggested to a senator earlier this year that it was not authentic, and he repeated that claim to an advisor more recently. Now that's a peculiar kind of lie, lying to yourself. Let's talk through this spectrum and the weekend's news. Back with me here, Olivia Nuzzi, John Avlon, and Joanne Lippman. So this Access Hollywood revelation, I think, is fascinating. The New York Times shared this overnight. Makes me wonder what the president's saying in private and whether he actually believes these things. To me, that's a lie no matter what, because we all know the tape is a real document.
Right. Well, I think Donald Trump knows that for his supporters, Donald Trump is a feeling, and nothing that he says really is going to change the way that they feel about him. They think that everything that he does is for their greater good. And so I don't think that he worries about that. I also think everything has taught him, everything has reinforced since the campaign, that nothing that he says really matters in the end. He won anyway. He was lying.
So should I bother creating a spectrum?
We should
Everything
bother.
from truth
the
to a
press
lie?
should bother, certainly. But I think everything has reinforced for him that if he lies, it doesn't matter at the end of the day as far as he is concerned. He doesn't care about us calling out his lies, even though he wants approval and he wants the establishment to like him, I think, deep down.
CNN itself actually has shown that he says something like, you calculated 5.5 mistruths per day. And I love your spectrum, but I have to say that I think it's a really dicey question to even raise. I think it is very controversial to say lie, because lie suggests intent, right? I think it is our job as journalists to point out when things are not true, to point out when they are exaggerated. But to say something is a lie, I think is a very different thing.
And yet a lot of viewers at home are screaming at the TV saying, he's lying, just say he's lying. There's this tension.
I respectfully disagree. And these are editorial choices, but I think part of our job is to call a lie and a fact a fact. We need to insist on a fact-based debate, and that doesn't require us always being soothsayers and figuring out intent. Sometimes it's very clear. If he's reversing himself on the Access Hollywood tape in this belief that other people won't remember what we've seen and what he's said, that goes to intent, or at least a distension from reality. What I think we need to understand is that for Donald Trump, the baseline is what he called, when he was a real estate magnate, truthful hyperbole.
I was going to put that on the spectrum.
Yeah. That truthful hyperbole is his baseline. He is a master marketer, whatever else you think about him. The problem is that instinct, that impulse, which has apparently served him rather well in life, is utterly incompatible with the responsibilities of the presidency, where words matter, where they have life and death weight. And so it is our job to call that out and to insist on a fact-based debate. And that means calling out a lie, but also recognizing their gradations.
An example of a gradation is President Trump's tweets about the NFL, right? He continues to talk about this kneeling issue. And he says the league is hemorrhaging. He says the ratings and attendance are way down. Now, I would call that a distortion, because ratings are down, but they're not way down. But again, that's open to interpretation.
But Brian, I think we get into these semantic debates amongst ourselves and the press, and I think it doesn't really matter if we say mistruth, we say falsehood, we say lie. At the end of the day, what we're saying is what the president is telling us is not true. And I think whether or not we say lie specifically, or we just say falsehood, we say inaccuracy, I don't think that really matters so much. I think it's something that we like to make a big deal about, but the effect is the same if you read a newspaper or an article in the Daily Beast.
The importance is pointing out what is fact and what is not fact. But also, that's really, really important that gets lost in a lot of this discussion, including about the Time magazine cover, is a lot of this is simply distraction, right? What we need to do in the press is to keep our eye on the ball, right? We've got the Mueller investigation going on. You know, per the Times, we've got diplomats who are fleeing from the State Department. We've got sexual harassment charges that are swirling around not just a lot of media and political figures, but around the president himself.
I disagree.
There are a lot of serious issues that we should be focused on.
I disagree. The president is the ball. I mean, we have to follow what he's saying, what he's doing, and I don't think it's fair to say it's a distraction because we are reporting on it accurately. It's newsworthy if the president is having a fight with Time Magazine or with the NFL, and I think we can do multiple things at once. We can cover Russia, we can cover the sexual assault stuff, and we can also cover his fight with a magazine.
Well, but to the extent we need to make choices, right? And these are all choices we can make individually or as news organizations. I think the bigger point is this: sometimes he's trying to distract and deflect intentionally by saying something outrageous, and therefore you won't see adequate coverage over policy decisions that actually impact people's lives. And I think that's where there needs to be a degree of discipline, because he can distract us by saying something outrageous, but if it's really meaningless and ephemeral, we should be focusing on the policy decisions that will actually impact people's lives.
And there is some evidence, actually, that it is starting to backfire with his own supporters. So USA Today and the USA Today Network, we have, USA Today is the flagship, and 109 local papers like the Des Moines Register and the Arizona Republic. And we're half red and half blue. And we are very, very much in touch with all of our audience, including those who are deeply red, who are deep Trump supporters, and we go back to them. And one of the things that we see in our panel of Trump supporters is that they have found that even though they still support him, they find that the tweeting is a distraction and that it is preventing him from actually executing on the promises that he made to better their own lives.
Joanne, stick around for me. Olivia, John, thank you for being here. Quick break because we want to get to the sexual harassment tipping point. This week, one journalist fired, another suspended. All the latest right after this. Within 24 hours of a Washington Post story about sexual harassment allegations in Charlie Rose's past, Rose was fired by CBS, PBS, and Bloomberg. I was keeping a close eye on how CBS News covered this story. Here's a sampling of how it was addressed on air.
This will be investigated. This has to end. This behavior is wrong, period.
At least 3 women who asked not to be identified said they experienced unwanted sexual contact from Rose while working at CBS News.
As personal as the story is, we will continue to cover it here diligently at CBS.
Now, we are all part of the story. I also think we're not shying away from reporting it.
A difficult situation for CBS, and it's not the only news organization having to cover harassment allegations against one of its own staffers. The New York Times is facing the same issue. White House correspondent Glenn Thrush now suspended in the wake of accusations of sexual harassment in his past, covered by Vox.com. He issued an apology, and the Times says it is now investigating. Back with me now here in New York, Joanne Lippman, the editor-in-chief of USA Today and the USA Today Network. She's the author of the forthcoming book, That's What She Said, on closing the gender gap at work. And back with me in Washington, David Zurwick, media critic for the Baltimore Sun. David, you wrote this week for the Sun about this challenge, having to have news outlets covering their own scandals. We've seen this at NPR, the New York Times, and CBS now. How would you judge the coverage?
It's varied. I thought CBS did a wonderful job in its coverage, and I wrote about Norah O'Donnell and Gayle King. Norah O'Donnell said, "We will not have equality in the workplace or society until there's a reckoning and a taking of responsibility." She recognized the magnitude of this, Brian. This is a cultural change. This is a moment presented to us. And I think they really, listen, you and I both know how hard it's been for CBS to find somebody who could gain traction in the morning. It's going back to 1954 when Walter Cronkite was interviewing the puppet, the Charlemagne, in the morning.
CBS has always been an also-ran in the morning, yeah.
It's been a graveyard for them. Charlie Rose comes along, and in his 5 years, they go from 2.4 million to 3.5 million. That's huge. That's huge money for the network. Instead of losing money for CBS, they're now going to make some money with him. So for them to act as swiftly as they did, and to make that call as cleanly, sends a signal this won't be tolerated. I really admire CBS, and I can't say enough about how Gayle King and Norah O'Donnell handled that on the air. I thought they were outstanding. Different people are covering it differently, but I really think they need, each of the news institutions needs to stand up and acknowledge, when she says a day of reckoning, we have to acknowledge how deeply sexist even our finest news organizations were. Women from my generation didn't have a chance, and it took me a long time to understand how much harder and how much better they had to be in an all-male environment, and how many of them, when they tried to blow the whistle, were run out of the business. And it was all done silently with an old boys hiring network that said, oh, she's a problem, she's a troublemaker, she can't handle the pressure, she's crazy. I heard that about women in the business. Now I look back and I wonder how many of them it was somebody slammed them into a booth and tried to start kissing them and then said, if I made you feel uncomfortable, you know, of course you made her feel uncomfortable. You slammed in a booth and stuck your tongue down her throat. I mean, this is outrageous where we are today, and we
you
have
wonder,
to.
I was going to say, you wonder how much talent was lost in various industries because of moments like that.
That's exactly it, Brian. On Allison Camerata's excellent town hall for CNN on Tipping Point, I think it was Gretchen Carlson who said that. Instead of worrying about the men who are going to lose their jobs now, let's go back multiple generations and find some of the women who never had a chance at a career or had their careers shortened. And God bless her for giving voice to those women for even a moment on a show.
Yeah, you mentioned tipping point, and Joanne, you wrote about this, saying in journalism talk a lot about tipping points and defining moments, but very rarely do these moments last.
Yes.
Is that what it feels like to you right now?
Well, I would love to see this moment last, but first of all, you know, in terms of this situation, I do think CBS did handle it extremely well. But what we have to do is keep the focus on the victims, right? As opposed, we keep talking about these guys who are losing their jobs. What about all of the women, right? So let's keep the focus on the women, but also on the collateral damage. There is a ton of collateral damage here in that when you think about Charlie Rose, who has a production company that has given, you know, young women and men employment, what happens to them? What happens on a program like Transparent, one of the few programs that actually was hiring transgender actresses, right?
We're not likely to leave it, yeah.
Exactly. So there's so much damage that continues here. I do think that, you know, everyone thought that Anita Hill in 1991 would be a tipping point. And apparently not, right? So I do have some concerns about that. But yeah, I think that the larger issue here, though, and the reason we're seeing this enormous outcry right now isn't because every woman has been slammed into a booth and had a tongue shoved down her throat. It's because every woman, and I would gather that every single woman watching this program today knows what it feels like to be interrupted, not taken seriously, her ideas not heard until they're credited to a man. And that is something that I found in the heart of my reporting for my book, That's What She Said, was this lack of respect that sort of has been a through line. And so I think one of the major issues that we're seeing is there's been this pent-up frustration among women who, despite all the gains that we have made, there's still every day 1,000 tiny little things that women experience that men don't and men aren't aware of.
We'll have you back
Brian.
when the book comes out. Great to see you.
Yeah, good to
David,
see you.
I'm out of time, but thank you both for being here. We've got a big story coming up next, AT&T versus the government. The elephant in the room is this network, CNN.